And it wasn't, don't worry about it, it wasn't one of those old post-traumatic stress flashbacks. It wasn't one of my combat flashbacks, even though I have one of those every now and then, I can tell you. But this was a pleasant flashback. You know, I flashed back to 1968 as a young man in Des Moines, Iowa, coming from the farmlands there. And I got my first letter. I never got a letter in the mail. You know, the parents got letters, they got bills and those kind of things. And I got my first letter, and I feel good. I went out to pick up the mail and I saw my name on it. And I opened it up, and I felt so important, folks. I got my first letter from the President of the United States in 1968. Everybody didn't get those. You veterans know what I'm talking about because they say greetings.
Right.
This is Uncle Sam.
Right.
And I showed that letter to my parents. My mother looked at it, and I watched the water roll up my mother's eyes, and actually there was a little anger on her face. And my mother said, "Stick in the gut and decay." That's Cherokee. That's Cherokee profanity. My mother was upset. My mother comes from the reservations of Oklahoma. And her father actually rode with the Buffalo Soldiers, grandfather actually. And she remembered, she had some history coming out of those reservations, and she just didn't want her son in the military. But I was excited because I saw that maybe this was, I had some purpose here. I never had anything that I could really call purpose at the time. And my dad looked at the letter, and this brother from Tennessee, he said, "Wonderful. Go do what you got to do." Dad's a veteran, and so I was kind of torn. Mom said he's not going. My daddy said he's getting out of here. So I showed up for induction at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. Some of you may have heard of Fort Des Moines. Fort Des Moines is the first place that they had black or African-American OCS. That's where they trained their officers back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so at this historic place, I stood tall and took the oath. I had some purpose, finally. And these folks, they took me in. I had a beard, and I had this long afro, about 10 inch. This is the 60s. I used to do cards with people, and I talk stuff. But the folks kind of put me in place. They shaved me, clean shaved me. They cut my hair, cut that fro off, high and tight. Wasn't very high. It was real tight. And they gave me a uniform. And I feel good about that. I never had a suit before. And so they showed me how to polish up my brass and all of that. So when I was asked to come speak today, I had that flashback, and you know, I got to admit, I went and pulled out my old low quarters. And you know what I did? I spit shined them. Some of you already know how to spit touch. I'm getting them ready. You see, I was going to show up today in uniform. In fact, I got my uniform out, and I hung it on the door, started getting it together. I thought about shaving, clean shaving today. In fact, I was going to go down to J. Henry's barbershop on Church Street, and I was going to cut this laid back afro off. I was going to do all that. But what I did first is I got that uniform together, and I hung it up on the door, and I got my medals all together, and shined that brass again, looking sharp. And I called my wife in and I said, "Honey, what you think?" You know, wives have a way of putting you in shape, get things back in perspective. Linda said, "Baby, I think you ought to try that uniform on." You know, it hadn't crossed my mind. You know, I had no clue that this Florida weather would shrink that uniform that much in 16 years. But you know, didn't shave. I I didn't cut this laid back afro off, but I'm standing tall because I'm here to talk about our veterans, the most important people that I know. Now, I'm not going to take a lot of time in talking about all the historical things that veterans done. You know a lot about that. I'm going to talk about some more current veterans in just a bit, and I really want the youngsters to hear a lot of this, because really school ought to be out today.
Amen.
Or at least this ought to be part of the curriculum.
Yes.
And I'm going to trust that on much of the curriculum and many of the schools that they're doing that. I know we have veterans in the classroom teaching.
Yes.
We've got veterans that are in charge of the schools. I've got a friend of mine, Mr. James, who served with me in Korea, and he ended up, he's an administrator at the school. So I want you to pay attention to the importance of the day, because it seems to me that Veterans Day doesn't really get the hoopla and the credence that many of the other days do. You know, the 4th of July, folks are off and going around having parties and barbecuing. And Veterans Day oftentimes is kind of looked at as a Memorial Day. In fact, in Memorial Day, we kind of look at our loved ones and lost. We look at the veterans. And for some reason, Veterans Day doesn't get all the attention that it ought to get. It's wonderful for me to follow the words of our new Commander-in-Chief, you know, who says that we ought to get back to that importance. Talking about purpose. This day, above all, gives us the opportunity to celebrate what makes this country great. Now, veterans, old veterans, some of you folks here, and you can see the folks are some older, some younger. We can see that some are bigger, some smaller. Most are good looking, some not. But you see, all these folks didn't have to serve. Even when I got drafted, I didn't have to show up. I could have opted for jail. Muhammad Ali opted. He had a lot more money, though he could kind of fight it. But you see, most of the veterans decided to serve, wanted to serve, found purpose. For some veterans, military service meant that the conflict of World War II. Others, a lifetime of peacekeeping missions, and others, the tense standoff during that Cold War. Others found themselves in the jungles of Vietnam and in Korea. Some found themselves in Panama. There's many conflicts that our military has served over the years. And of course, we can't forget today, for many, there's many tours that these young folks have to go to in Afghanistan and Iraq, back to back. Some of these folks, the Guard and Reserve, have had to give up jobs and go to war and come back to the job for a short period of time and then go back because the numbers are so low. Some of these folks sacrifice so much that they come back and the job's not there any longer. Ought not be like that. There's supposed to be policy that prohibits that, but it happens. Well, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about ordinary folks who have accomplished extraordinary things. Actually, that's who veterans are. I want to talk for a moment about a veteran who's a Marine. His name is Marine Sergeant Clay South. By all accounts, he's just an ordinary young man from Indiana. 5 years ago, on Veterans Day 2004, Sergeant Clay found himself on the wrong end of an Iraqi insurgent's AK-47. And interesting, those AK-47s they was using against me and my comrades and some of us in Vietnam. That communist weapon is still around being used. That's a shame. Sergeant Clay was shot in the face and leg. He also bore the brunt of a hand grenade that shattered half of his face. After years of painful therapy and more than 40 reconstructive surgeries, Sergeant Clay now has a titanium jaw, 22 false teeth, constant numbness throughout his face. But the story doesn't end there. Once he left service, Sergeant Clay now spends most of his time visiting veterans in the military hospitals. He delivers backpacks full of gifts such as iPods and portable Sony PlayStations. He organizes outings for many of these folks in restaurants. He's still involved. In fact, Clay has made his life that of helping others. In fact, he's the president of an organization called the Veterans of Valor. And this is a group that helps thousands of men and women who have shed blood for this country. Sergeant Clay was an ordinary man doing extraordinary things.